All right, Scott Reynolds of PewterReport.com joins us now. And Scott, the move itself is not a surprise. Did the timing on Sunday night surprise you? They pulled the trigger now and made the move with Dirk Koetter.
Not really, Dan. When you look at Dirk Koetter, I think that this Falcons loss is very indicative of what we've seen in the last couple of years in these 5-11 seasons. A lot of close games that the Buccaneers just couldn't finish. And Dirk Koetter ends up being 3-9 in games decided by 7 points or less, and that simply wasn't good enough. And the Blazers have fired the last 3 head coaches now that have had back-to-back losing seasons: Greg Schiano, Lovie Smith, and now Dirk Koetter.
Are you surprised by the decision at all? GM Jason Licht stays, Dirk goes. Are you surprised by that at all?
I'm really not. And I say that because when you look at Jason Licht, what he's able to do this year specifically, I think Vita Vea really helped Jason Licht's case down the stretch here, this last 5 games. Yeah. And Jameis Winston today, 4 touchdowns. I think Jameis, since the benching, has come back and had 13 touchdown passes, only, I believe, 4 or 5 interceptions. So he's played really well. And then you look at the Jason Pierre-Paul trade, picking up Carl Nassib off waivers. Not all of those moves have panned out. Ronald Jones, the second-round pick, did not. But I think there's been enough there with Mike Evans, Chris Godwin, who had big days today. There's been enough in the draft and in free agency to keep Jason Licht around 1 more year at least and have him pick the next head coach of the Buccaneers.
All right, speaking of next head coach, who is it? Name him. Who do you think is maybe a leader in the clubhouse before we get the leader in the clubhouse?
Well, I tell you, with Jason Licht sticking around now, you have to look at Bruce Arians, who spent some time with Jason out there in Arizona as the head coach. And I know that he's got a lot of respect for Bruce and what he was able to do in Arizona. And also Bruce Arians is a big Jameis Winston fan. We know Jameis Winston is tied to Jason Licht, and so that might be a good fit as an offensive guru coming in and helping this offense pick up where it left off and maybe take it to the next level. I think John Harbaugh is another name to keep an eye on. I think that the team has had some real affection for him from afar. He's done a great job. He beat the Buccaneers a couple weeks ago. And I think that John Harbaugh is a name out there that the Buccaneers, also the Broncos, and maybe even the Dolphins are going to be pursuing in a trade. And we'll have to see what the compensation level is, but that's another name to keep in mind.
And of course, depending on which head coach is selected, do you foresee any current members on this Bucs coaching staff staying with the team?
That's a great question, and that's a possibility. It really just depends on who that coach is. If it's someone like a Bruce Arians, you know, he had Brenson Buckner as the defensive line coach out there in Arizona. And maybe he might want to keep a Todd Monken as an offensive play caller. I think Mark Duffner's done a fantastic job as the defensive coordinator, and I would have Mark Duffner on my staff any day as the linebacker coach for sure. So I think those are some names right there to keep an eye on. And Skylar Fulton, who Dirk Koetter brought in as the wide receivers coach, you look at what Adam Humphries did with the career year, with Chris Godwin having a career year, even turning around Deshaun Jackson's performance, and then of course Mike Evans with a fantastic season, capping that off today with the all-time single season receiving yardage record for the Buccaneers. He's an up-and-coming position coach that I would have as my wide receivers coach any day of the week.
There's a lot of pieces in play here moving forward. You mentioned some of the candidates a couple of minutes ago. You know, Jameis Winston is probably going to be the quarterback in 2019. Does that affect possibly the interview process of who may want to take this job?
Yeah, and that's an interesting point, Dan. When you look at Jameis Winston, he's got 1 year, right, the 5th-year option. And now this head coach has to come in and basically inherit Jameis Winston. And if for some reason, and we've seen a 5th-year option quarterback in Josh Freeman not pan out before in his contract year, if that happens again, unfortunately, in Tampa Bay, that puts this new coach, whoever it is, kind of on the hot seat from day one. And we've seen the Blazers' quick trigger finger in getting rid of Raheem Morris and Dirk Koetter after 3 years, and Lovie Smith and Greg Schiano after 2. So, yeah, I think the Jameis Winston effect will certainly impact not only who the next head coach is, but also what his tenure is going to look like.
And Scott, sticking on offense, earlier this week, wide receiver Deshaun Jackson expressing maybe he wants to leave the Tampa Bay area after this season. If he decides to leave, if this all happens, how does that impact this receiving core?
Yeah, that's a great point. And when you look at Deshaun Jackson, he wants out. That's fine. Good riddance. The Buccaneers can use that $10 million cap space in many other ways. And they're going to need it because right now the Buccaneers are entering the 2019 season with the 4th least amount of cap space. After years of being flush with cap room, now they're in a cap crunch. So they're going to need that room. I think Chris Godwin showed today, and he's shown earlier this year, why he can be an effective number 2 opposite Mike Evans. And Adam Humphries, I mean, you talk about Jason Light sticking around. He loves Adam Humphries, and I think that Adam Humphries is going to get a contract extension offer here in Tampa, and he's been a big part of what Jameis Winston and this offense has been able to achieve this year. So I think that having Jason Light stick around benefits both of those players for sure, and probably means the end of Deshaun Jackson's time in Tampa.
You know, Gerald McCoy, he was asked about his future after the game. He chose his words carefully. He had a long silence. There was a little bit of emotion in there. I'm not sure he knows his future. Yeah,
he doesn't. And really for the first time. I mean, he's been one of the faces of this franchise for a long time, since 2010, when he was the Bucs' first-round pick. And but now he's going to be 31 years old in February, making $13 million. Again, the Buccaneers are in a salary cap crunch heading into 2019. They need to clear some room because there's a couple of guys. Adam Humphries is one of those we talked about. Donovan Smith, Quandon Alexander. Those are players not under contract in 2019. They're going to need contract extensions, or at least maybe a franchise tag for Donovan Smith. So that cap room has to be created somewhere. And Gerald McCoy, with 6 sacks again at age 31, making $13 million. He's done an awful lot for this team and this community. But at some point in time, we've seen all of the great Buccaneer players end up going at some point in time, and it might be Gerald McCoy's time, and I think he knows that.
You mentioned Adam Humphries possibly getting a contract extension, but is there any other player, in your opinion, that the Bucs should really make an effort, of course, depending on whoever the head coach may be, to keep in 2019?
Yeah, I think Quandon Alexander is that player, and it's tough because he's had an ACL injury, and it's going to be interesting to see how long it's going to take him to recover. We didn't expect Kendall Beckwith, the other linebacker, to be out all of training camp and all of the season recovering from his broken ankle. But if Quan can come back healthy, and ACL injuries aren't what they used to be, so my guess is that he is the heartbeat of this team, especially defensively. They missed him terribly down the stretch. And I think that Jason Light is going to want to at least give him a 1-year prove-it type deal worth a good chunk of change to keep him out of the free agent market. But I wouldn't be surprised if he gets a long-term contract extension if the team gets good news from the medical front in March.